We continue by starting chapter 24, which is chapter 8, a chapter of miracles, and part 4. About this time occurred one of those seasons of excitement in which the populace showed a disposition to make Jesus king and hasten his revelation of his messianic powers. Now, that's actually two different things, but Matthew 8, Mark 4, Luke 8 and 9. Jesus had no politics. That's absolutely not true. He definitely had a social mission, but even if we disregard Judah ben Judah, also known as Barabbas, who wrote what the book of Revelations was in its pre-Christian version. They actually have that, by the way, from the first decade of the Common Era or something like that. These popular paroxysms were always so managed by Jesus that they should create no outbreak and thus connect his name and mission with the ephemeral politics of his nation. No man can be a great moral teacher and a politician. Politics are for a day, morality for eternity. Yeah, it's not about the individual or the party, it's about the principles behind it, right? It seems utterly impracticable to make any satisfactory conjecture as to the political opinions of Jesus, whether he was Herodian or anti-Herodian. Well, we can probably see that wasn't really the point. He would have absolutely nothing to do with these questions. So, when another burst of excitement came, he directed his disciples to accompany him to the other side of the lake. But he would have wanted the establishment of theocracy if the people were going to go with it. But I mean, real theocracy, not some church state or some dictatorship where it's what one guy wants rather than, the prophetic rule wasn't about, just the prophets orchestrating their wants. They often even allowed the people what was wrong. They told them what was wrong, but, they weren't going to enforce most things, right? Into Perea, the eastern side of the lake of Gennesaret and of the river Jordan was called beyond, hence its Greek name Perea, which means beyond. A certain scribe and an official, expounder of the moral law, came to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." He may have amplified this short speech into a statement of his views of the position and prospects of Jesus, or there may have been something in his manner which showed he had ulterior designs, or else Jesus read his character at a glance. The reply shows that the teacher understood precisely the spirit in which the statement was made by this new disciple. The foxes have lairs, and the birds of the heaven have places of shelter, but the Son of Man hath not where he may lay his head. It is supposed that Jesus adopted the name, the Son of Man, with reference to the prophetic vision of Daniel 7:13 of that book, right? Because all other titles of the Messiah had been preserved to foster the worldly expectations of the Jewish people, and because it comported at once with the humility of his position and the dignity of his character. The scribe was willing to endure for a few days or even a few months the roving life which Jesus had adopted, expecting that the great leader would soon ascend the throne of David, and then those who had shared his poverty would share his glorious fortunes. He was as cunning as a fox, and doubtless felicitated himself on his sharpness of calculation and superior skill In reading the signs of the times, the reply of Jesus is graphic and touching, and perhaps by its figures had reference to the cunning and the fugitive character of the scribe's enthusiasm. He did not mean to say strictly that the Son of Man had no sleeping place, for he had, at this very time, some friends who devoted themselves to looking after his personal comfort, and so far as we know, he was never without a night's lodging, except when he voluntarily set apart a night to devoted vigils. He simply meant that he had no fixed place of residence, a comfort enjoyed by even the lower order of animals. It was a solemn warning to the scribe that if he joined his fortunes to those of Jesus, he would become a homeless wanderer, as the Son of Man had given himself to a life of perpetual voluntary poverty. Whether the scribe became a disciple in the stricter sense, we have no means of knowing. Lang suggests that this was Judas Iscariot. Remember, there's no J sounds in that language. But it was a mere hypothesis suggested by the characteristics of Judas displayed by the scribe. Another of the followers of Jesus, called quite generally disciples, said to him, "Sir, permit me first to go and bury my father." Jesus replied, "Follow me and leave the dead to bury their own dead, but go thou and preach the kingdom of God." It is not said who this person was. A church tradition, which can be traced to Clement of Alexandria in the 3rd century, says it was Philip, which cannot be correct, as he had already been called. Lang suggests Thomas, but this is only conjectural. It is not important, but the lesson of Jesus is, what did he mean? The request of the follower seems natural and even dutiful. The Jews buried their dead. The Greeks burned the corpses of their friends. Kikero, like something, I don't know what that stands for, but 2:22, and Pliny 7:55 says that burial was the ancient mode of disposing of the dead. Well, it also saves resources, right? So in some ways it's the safest, right? As well. Great stress was laid on this. The interment was conducted with minuteness of ceremonial. It was considered one of the most sacred duties of a son to bury his parents, worthy deceased. The disciple in this case seemed to desire to follow Jesus. He did not make an excuse that he might go seeking his own pleasure or his own gain. It was to perform what all his nation regarded as a son's imperative duty. Celsus, early in the 3rd century, brought a reply of Jesus as objection to him because he demanded what was opposed to duty to parents. Now, if that's Latin, you pronounce all the C's as K's. And there was the question put, who put the question? It's like, why do we have a C and a K in Latin? Because they both sound the same. This, I don't know what they call the C and K, but you know what I mean. What was opposed to duty to parents? This saying of Jesus does present grave difficulties. We must interpret the word dead in both places in the sentence as meaning the same or different things. So perhaps the father was a different religion or not a religion, and therefore, it's up to his community to do the burial. If the same, then what is it? The plain sense is usually accepted, namely, naturally dead. But this seems unintelligible because corpses cannot inter corpses. If different, then we may attach to the former the sense of spiritually dead, those described by Paul as dead in trespasses and in sins, and to the latter the natural meaning, and then the passage would signify, let the work of interment be committed to sinners. But that is a most harsh interpretation and not consistent with the temper of Jesus and the general spirit of his teachings. Well, when we try to say these things are out of Jesus' character, remember that Jesus, in the historical sense, is for people. And we see a bunch of mythological characters that have been put into the blend. If the whole expression be taken as hyperbolical and paradoxical, it will give us this sense. Jesus thus teaches, in the most striking and impressive manner, the lesson that the interests of the kingdom of heavens, which he was preaching, are paramount, so that if there seems to be even a natural duty, the performance of which will draw a disciple of the Messiah from obeying some express command of his, and then the apparent duty, even if it be that of bearing a parent, is in reality not a duty. Let the dead go unburied rather than Jesus be disobeyed. It is certainly a claim on the part of Jesus to supremacy over the hearts and lives of his disciples. It is a claim to be more than teacher. Or is it? It is a peremptory demand for the total surrender of the whole man to Jesus and the interest of his kingdom. It is the voice of a spiritual autocrat. Jesus must have felt that he had a right to all this, or he must have been conscious that he was putting forward a claim which he had no right to make. His conscience, at the moment this speech was made, was either that of the supreme spiritual ruler of the world, or that of the most daring impostor. Now, no, there's a third option, and the Bible lists what that is. I speak not the doctrine of the one, my own doctrine, but that of the one that sent me. So Jesus was a omnial, very explicitly. But, in Arabic you have the Rasulullah, the person who has the message of God. Honorable mention is made of those who discharged the filial duty. See Genesis 25:9 and 35:29 and so on. Tobit 4:3. But he speaks unwaveringly and died with this claim upon his lips, having never for a moment abated a jot thereof. There never was a teacher or leader before the time of Jesus or after who went so far as this. He stands alone in this claim. In immediate connection with this circumstance, there occurred a similar occasion for a similar lesson. Another of his mere followers said, Lord, I will follow thee, but let me go to bid farewell to those in my house. But Jesus said to him, No man putting his hand to the plow and looking at the things behind is rightly disposed for the kingdom of God. Here again is brought out the paramount importance of the kingdom of the heavens. The mind must have no indecision. A man who wavers is as unfit for the great work of teaching the doctrine of the universal kingdom as one is unfit for agriculture who holds the handle of a plow and gazes back at the furrow. Well, you can look at things at different angles, but, don't distract yourself by something like that, right? Upon dismissing the multitude who had waited upon his ministry, Jesus went down to the shore of the lake and entered into a ship with his disciples. Accompanied by other and smaller vessels, they started for the other side. Worn with the fatigue of teaching, Jesus fell asleep on a pillow in the hinder part of the ship. It was probably evening. There fell upon the lake one of those storms to which the peculiar position of the Sea of Galilee exposes it. Thompson, 2:32, was for several days in one of those storms, which he thus describes. To understand the causes of these sudden and violent tempests, we must remember that the lake lies low, 600 feet lower than the ocean, that the vast and naked plateau of the Jordan rises to a great height, spreading backward to the wilds of the Haran and upward to snowy Hermon, that the watercourses have cut out profound ravines and wild gorges converging to the head of the lake, and that these act like gigantic funnels to draw down the cold winds from the mountains. And moreover, these winds are not only violent, but they come down suddenly, and often when the sky is perfectly clear. I once went in to swim near the hot baths, and before I was aware, a wind came rushing over the cliffs with such force that it was with great difficulty I could regain the shore. Of another storm, when on the eastern side, he says, the sun had scarcely set when the wind began to rush down toward the lake, and it continued all night with constantly increasing violence, so that when we reached the shore next morning, the face of the lake was like a huge boiling cauldron. We had to double pin all the tent ropes, and frequently were obliged to hang with our whole weight upon them to keep the quivering tabernacle from being carried off bodily in the air. It was such a storm as this that was rocking the ship which held Jesus and the apostles. The teacher was in the quiet of slumber. The disciples perceived their great jeopardy. They ran to him in terror, some crying, Master, Master, we are perishing, while others cried, Master, carest thou not that we perish? Their solicitude did not seem to be wholly selfish. Undoubtedly, some of them included Jesus, in that we, as the most precious of all existences, it must have agitated them greatly to see a person who had exhibited such power and wisdom now lying in the utmost carelessness, asleep amid such imminent peril. Jesus arose and spoke unto the wild whirl and storm fury, and said to the winds and the raging the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased at once, and there was a great calm. The stars shone in the quiet sky above the great lake. And he quietly said to the men in the ship, Why are ye so fearful? Where is your faith? The simple exercise of such prodigious power over the forces of nature, when in stormy motion, produced in their minds a sudden sentiment of awe. They were surprised and amazed, and filled with exceeding fear, and said to one another, Who is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him? It was morning when Jesus and his disciples reached the southeastern margin of the lake, in a region into which was the intent of Jesus to carry his beneficent ministry. This landing was signalized by a very remarkable miracle, the details of which make it interesting to fix the locality if possible. And we're connecting to Matthew 8, 9, Mark 5, Luke 8. A difficulty meets us in the names employed by the historians. Matthew calls it the country of the Gadarenes, Mark of the Gerasenes, and Luke of the Gergesenes. The reading of Codex Sinaiticus is followed, but not the common English version. 3 places are mentioned in the ancient writers: Gadara, Gerasa, and Gergesa. The first was 10 miles inland, and the approach to it was by a toilsome way, which would require several hours to make it on foot. It is represented by Josephus as the capital of Perea, and by Polybius as a very strongly fortified city. Now, let us go back just a little bit and point out that if they were familiar with tonic, they would have known what sort of individual Jesus was, because all the miracles that the Bible has Jesus do were done before. It doesn't produce their greatness, it just doesn't make him a deity. The ruins to this day are give evidence of the great former magnificence. This can hardly be accepted as the place where the miracle was performed, as we find among its circumstances the fact that a herd of swine ran down a steep place into the sea. In order to do so from Gadara, they must have run down a mountain in this neighborhood of the town, have forded a stream quite as formidable as the Jordan, and then crossed a plain of several miles before reaching the sea. For similar reasons, we must reject Gerasa, a city also mentioned by Josephus. as situated among the mountains of Gilead, 20 miles east of the Jordan. And that's an illustration of where we're talking about. But if it's a large body of water that's like a mile across or something, does the word sea apply to that? It depends on what language. The highest probability is in favor of a spot suggested by Dr. Thompson in Land and Book, Volume 2, 35. On the eastern shore of the lake, he has found a pile of ruins still called by the natives Gersa. Very nearly pronounce Gergesa, the name in Luke, and that which Origen gives as the supposed site of the miracle. Thompson. Once you say Thompson represents that an immense mountain stands above these ruins, so high and so declivitous that a herd of swine rushing frantically down would be carried by the momentum of the descent over the narrow ledge of beach into the sea. Mr. Tristram, in his Land of Israel, endorses this view of the question. It is to be noticed that the historians do not mention any particular town, but call the site of the miracle the country of the Gadarenes or Gergesenes, so that whatever town be selected, the miracle must have occurred near the sea, and somewhere near the site of the ancient city of the Girgashites. All that region abounds in rock excavated for purposes of sepulture, and to this day the whole community in the region make their dwellings in the tombs. Sepulcher, okay. The testimony of Origen, the ancient tradition, and the opinion of so well informed a traveler as Thompson concur to fix the place at the site of the ancient Gergesa. It was at this spot, then, that Jesus landed early in the morning, which followed the night in which he had calmed the storm on the lake. Now, if you compare what's being found, per se, about what's in the Bible, even Old and New Testament, versus some of the stuff that's in, like, the Zohar and stuff like this, at least they're using a real biography, they're using elements of truth to mix into their story. They're not making up, oh, well, I've never been there, so I'm going to just make up stuff. It's like, there is no mountain next to that place, or, that sort of thing. At least they know the geography and some of the other things. Here a sight met him more appalling than a tempest on a lake, the fury of a man lashed by the tortures of insanity. Mark and Luke speak of one demoniac, while Matthew mentions two. It's probably that there were two, but one was much fiercer than the other, and his cure so much more striking, and his afterlife so much better known to these historians, that they speak of him alone in a special manner. Robinson, in his Harmony, proposes the following illustration. In the year 1824, Lafayette visited the United States and was everywhere welcomed with honors and pageants. Historians will describe these as a notable incident in his life. Other writers will relate the same visit as made, and the same honors as enjoyed by two persons, namely Lafayette and his son. Will there be any contradiction between these two classes of writers? Will not both record the truth? See his Harmony, page 195. He exhibited all the most shocking phases of that terrible physical, intellectual, and spiritual insanity which manifested itself so frightfully in the days of Jesus. He was so ungovernably frantic that he had abandoned the abodes of men and made his dwelling among the dead. He tore his clothes from his person. He was a terror to travelers, so that men might not pass by the way. He'd acquired that wonderful strength which sometimes seems to come to maniacs. Men could not keep him bound. Often they had chained him, but he burst the bonds asunder. Night and day, this unhappy man, with fierce cries that made the rocks and seashore ring with the expression of his agony, roved through the wilderness or rushed along the beach of the lake. On this eventful morning, he saw Jesus from afar. Whatever may have been the cause, there was something in the appearance of Jesus that arrested him. He paused, he gazed, he approached. He fell at the feet of Jesus. He cried, "What to thee and me, Jesus, Son of God Most High? Here is an exhibition of that flux and reflux of passion frequently noticed in maniacs." He was alternately attracted and repelled by the spiritual magnetism of the pure Jesus. Jesus commanded the unclean spirit to leave the unhappy man, who then cried out, "Comest thou here to torment us before the time?" As if to steady the man's mind for a moment and recall him to a sense of his personality and identity, Jesus asked him his name, still believing himself to be in possession of the departed spirits of wicked men, and recollecting how his whole intellectual and moral constitution had been laid waste, as when troops dismantle a town, and probably recalling the appearance of a battalion of Roman soldiers, the wretched sufferer said, with a confusion of ideas so natural to his condition, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he besought Jesus that he would not send them away into the abyss, whatever that may mean. Whatever that might mean, on the adjoining mountain was a herd of about 2,000 hogs feeding. The demons besought Jesus to allow them to enter the swine. Well, that could be metaphorical, because you have different, usually in trinities, ideas of demons, right? You have the donkey, you have the swine, and the dog in one group. Well, the monkey, actually. The dog's not really, it tends not to be one of the animals, but in another culture you would have the rooster, the snake, and, well, in that case you'd have like a wolf or a dog or something, yeah. But the swine, obviously, just led by their lust. Of eating and other things. If it were really the fact that evil spirits, whether such as had inhabited human bodies or not, had the power to seize and employ the faculties of living human beings, the narrative shows that the powers of evil are full of a hateful malignity which is bent upon the work of destruction. If they could not occupy the bodily organs of men, they were willing to use those of beasts. Jesus granted their request. Forthwith they left the man and entered the swine, and the swine ran frantically down a steep place and fell into the lake, and were drowned. It requires some patience to give the least notice to such an objection as this, that it was a lawless act in Jesus to destroy the property of the owners of the hogs, and was cruelty to the swine themselves. Well, what were the owners going to do to the hogs, right? Jesus did this work, or he did not. If he did not, there is no ground for criticism in detail. Well, if it was about not obeying the law, what difference does it make if a person loses their thing in natural circumstances like that, right? If he did, he had all the authority over hogs, devils, and men. As to the cruelty, the same objection would lie against every case of the prevalence of murrain in cattle, or the disease known as the hog cholera, which has visited parts of America in late years. The only question is, did such an incident as this occur in the history of Jesus? Well, every family is hit by a swine-only disease in their lifetime in America. So we think we've done away with that. We haven't. And certain diseases like brain worms and stuff are like that have gone way up in recent years. But the historians who are present say it did. If the theories be rejected, this much is left. A man was found exhibiting the phenomena described. Jesus spake the words which are quoted as his. The change as described came upon the man. He was, or thought he was, held in the power of the souls of departed wicked men. Well, your beliefs can open you up to control of all sorts of entities, right? They asked to be permitted to go into the swine, or in his disordered fancy, he asked it for them. Jesus gave assent. At that instant, an immense herd of swine on the mountain, seized by a sudden and unaccountable panic, rushed over the ledge and fell into the sea. The man resumed his clothes and his reason. The owners of the swine were incensed, the spectators filled with awe, and Jesus was requested to leave their coasts. Apart from the settlement of the precise nature of demoniac possession, which must always probably be perplexing, here is a history of extraordinary spiritual power. And we see in the story of Muhammad how when the people heard, the final command that intoxicants were forbidden, the streets were stained with the wine and stuff. Because people just dumped it out immediately. And the same thing could be implied here, that, hey, this is not right, and he convinced the people, it's like, to give it up immediately. As if the pig's been cast to the sea, if you think it's metaphorical, but because obviously this person was actually treated him as a son of God in a way that, said it in a way that you could think he meant it literally. And people give up their polytheism, they give up some other things that go with it. The feeders of the swine went quickly to their employers in the city and related these marvelous incidents. The people from the city and the surrounding country flocked to the scene. When they beheld the placid face of the man who had been an untamable maniac, and saw him sitting clothed and in his right mind, and heard the narrative of the panic that had swept the swine away, and probably saw them floating in the lake beneath, the Gergesenes were seized with fear and began to pray Jesus to leave their coasts. The recovery of their fellow citizens was not to them such a matter of congratulation that they could afford to pay for it by the loss of their hogs. Jesus left them and went down towards the ship. Now we find that in that part of the world that in ancient times certain plants went extinct because of the overgrazing of some of the critters like that, and hogs in particular, or, left them and went down towards the ship. The healed and grateful patient accompanied his benefactor to the lakeside and solicited permission to follow him, which Jesus declined to give, saying, "Go to your home and to your friends, and tell them what the Lord hath done for you, and hath pitied you." Now, the Lord here would have been, Yahweh. They meant Yahweh. They didn't mean the spiritual master. Because we find, if anything, Jesus was trying to hide, was saying, hey, focus on God, not on my name. You can tell what happened, just leave my name out of it, right? If the Gergesenes declined the personal ministry of Jesus, they should not be without a missionary. The retorted demoniac, not only in his own town, but throughout a district of 10 cities known as the Decapolis, awoke the wonder of men by describing, as only such a man could, the horrible abyss out of which Jesus had so graciously lifted him. When Jesus crossed the lake, he found a crowd animated by sentiments, the very opposite of those that had caused the Gergesenes to urge him to depart from their coasts. The inhabitants of Capernaum and that region had been longing for his return. A day's absence was intolerable to people so enthusiastic in their admiration. The storm of the previous night had deepened their anxiety, so that they watched with interest the approach of the boat which held the great teacher. They received him gladly and escorted him to his home in Capernaum. As nearly as we can fix the date, we must here introduce several narratives of the transactions which are given with great simplicity, but are very affecting. Matthew 9, Mark 5, Luke 8. They present pleading sorrow in aspects most touching, and set forth the charm which the lovingness of Jesus, combined with his extraordinary power, was exerting upon people of all ranks. There was a man of distinction, the president of a synagogue, whose name was Jairus. Okay, we don't use the J name, but an S. Is it sh, or is it some other thing? And they're making it Greek sound. But some people had Greek names. They didn't have Hebrew or they didn't have Aramaic names. Every synagogue had its president, who superintended and directed the services, and was at the same time president of its college of elders. He had an only daughter, 12 years of age, and the girl was about to die. And that age sometimes, very often people that were 12 years old hadn't hit puberty. It was the standard. In his desperation of grief, the father bethought him of Jesus, and knowing where he was, ran to him and fell at his feet, and besought him to come and save the child. So bewildering was his grief that he gave a hurried and somewhat contradictory report of the state of affairs at home. He says she is dead. He says she is dying. It seems heartless to cite these self-contradictions of the poor man as proofs of the contradictions of the historians and the unreliability of the narrative. Well, it's not heartless to the guy. But this is not the common way that this is not too common of a thing to say. Well, you're just heartless because of there was stuff going on with the people, so you don't just ignore the contradictions. Well, see people writing in the 90 to 150. They weren't witnesses. They were hearing from people, from hearing from people, from hearing from people. It is more than heartless. It is senseless. No, it's sensible. It's to pay attention to the details like that. Careful observers of the workings of human passions and close students of the poets, those quick reporters of the soul of the humanity, cannot, it seems to me, fail to see in these touches proofs that the affair occurred as all these historians tell us. That Matthew and Mark and Luke are right, each and all, and that they could not have concluded here, and that this little scene could not have been painted by any master of fiction not superior to Shakespeare. To my mind, there are few stronger internal remarks of the genuineness and truthfulness of these narratives than this particular passage. Now, the rendering of the book of Revelations into a much better sounding English, now that was some literary talent right there, but the facts seem to have been these. When he left the house, she was apparently in extremis. She could live but a short time. He had been absent about long enough for the end to have come. She would be dead, he said, but he had not received distinct information of the event and therefore was not prepared to affirm it. And so, in his agitation and hurry, the father says, "My daughter is dead. She is dying. Come."